Hey guys, welcome to episode 4, and today we are talking about the pillars of animation. Alright, so Andy, what are the pillars of animation? These are 4 elements that make a human recognize something as animation in a traditional sense, and then beyond that give it personality. So the first one is outlines. Let's talk about outlines. These they evolved as basically a caricature of contrast, so contrast of lighting, contrast of color, and contrast of depth cues. And even as we've gotten better at animating these things in the modern day, they've just stuck around. You can imagine back in the old days when everything was like black and white. If you wanted to make something seem different, you had to draw a black outline around it, and that's just where it came from. So they have 2 big defining features. They have a general style, and I'm going to pop up some pictures here. They can be clean outlines, they can be sketchy, they can be wiggly, or they can be weird. There's all sorts of things you can do with outlines, and it's pretty cool. It's like the personality of the animator's hand is like embedding itself into the cartoon. The other feature that outlines can have is thickness. So are all the lines thick, or all the lines thin, or are some thick and some thin? Like, what's the logic that you use to differentiate between that? A lot of times it's actually based on these depth cues, or like these contrast cues. Like if there's a big changing lighting, you'd use a big thick line. If there's a little one, you use a little tiny outline, and that's how you get little thin lines for wrinkles on people's faces or little details like that, and then for the big things you get the big thick outlines. And the issues computers have with this, which is which are the problems we're gonna have to solve, are that they either do lines always uniform, or they're not uniform but in the wrong ways, and basically not a way that a human would do it, or they outline the wrong things or not enough things, and it's almost there, but it's just using the wrong thought process of how to make something outlined. So yeah, that's a very quick overview, and I'll do another video that goes over to this a lot more in depth as I actually show my outlining algorithm. So let's go on to the next pillar, which is visual physics. So visual physics is pretty fascinating. It handles the semi-tactile elements of things like weight and speed and impact, things that you can't possibly actually feel, but if you do it right, your mind sort of interprets it. It's pretty wild. In animation, this is traditionally called something called squash and stretch. I'll pop up more videos here, so you can imagine, they're showing a ball, and in the real world, it might just go like bonk, bonk, bonk. But in the squash and stretch world, to make the ball real thin, and then as it hits the ground, it flattens out, and then it goes boing, 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 boing like this. That's a great visual. But yeah, when we see it in fast motion, our mind goes and says, "Wow, it's getting thin," and then it's smacking and it's wiggling like that, and that just means that it has a big weight to it. And we actually go and we're interpreting that as weight and impact, and it's this has evolved from years and years of people animating and figuring out how to actually communicate those sensations to us without having to actually be there to feel the vibrations or actually try and lift something. It's pretty crazy, and it's also great for the element of speed. So if something's moving real fast, like if I move my hand real fast here, you'll see it's kind of blurry. But in a cartoon, they'll probably have a hand here and a hand here, and they'll have these kind of almost, if you look at a freeze frame, it'll kind of look like there is it's like 2 hands that are kind of grotesquely molded together. But in a cartoon, it makes it seem like real fast, smooth motion, and it's very dynamic. And you can the more you exaggerate these things, the more cartoony it gets. And the other thing to consider is that cartoons back in the old days were traditionally designed for, in movies, 24 frames a second, and maybe even lower. So the more they did these kind of squash and stretch, the more they kind of continuously joined images together, the smoother the animation felt. Even though we can do things nowadays in 60 frames a second, being able to do things slower but in a visually smoother way can actually feel more like traditional animation. Alright, the next one is background style. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this. Most people are probably familiar with this if they've watched any cartoons. Backgrounds in cartoons tend to look different than the characters, and that's just because characters are a tiny thing that animators have to deal with a lot, and backgrounds tend to be static, so they're usually painted in high detail. Not necessarily, but in higher quality things, they can be actually very good works of art. because it didn't have any motion in it. You'd see this in kind of like a lot of cartoon tropes, or they're walking over a field and maybe someone dug a hole and put leaves over it. But the part that's actually going to move looks completely different than the rest of the background, and that's just something that came from it. So the other nice thing about having a lot of contrast is that the characters pop out, so it keeps people focused on that, and the backgrounds are just that background. 3D things these days can go and make everything look the same, and that's fine, but at the same time you start to lose things in the complexity of it all. Speaking of complexity, the last pillar is non-Euclidean geometry. Now that sounds very mathy, and it kind of is. Another word for it could be non-continuous geometry. The idea behind this is that sometimes character designers aren't perfect, and other times good designs aren't continuous. In a 2D animation, and especially when animation comes out of something like a comic book where they haven't had to continually model something in 360 degrees, how you look at something will change how its features are laid out. So, a great example of this would be, the most extreme example of this is Mickey Mouse. I'm going to put up some pictures of him, and you're going to see, if you look at his ears, they're always facing the camera straight on. You never see like a side view of the ears, and it's not even spheres, because you never have one ear including the other. They're always just, bam, right there. And, there's a lot of other examples of this. Sonic the Hedgehog, especially a lot of characters like this will have like a mouth on the side of their face, like this. There we go. And, that's how we're used to seeing them, and I'll pop up a picture of Sonic Adventure here where when they first brought him in 3D and they had like the mouth in the center of his face, and it looks really freaking weird. And, Sega agreed, and if you look at future models of him in the later games, they do a trick where they actually have a mouth on both sides of his face, and then they just go and will render one or the other depending on which way he's facing the camera. And that's kind of, that's like the tip of the iceberg of how to handle this problem in, having a computer animate like that. And it's actually, there's a pretty simple solution to this, and I'm going to be pretty excited to show it off. But, yeah, that's the last pillar. I'll probably be doing videos about all of these. Yeah, so see you next time. Thanks for watching.